Hi, good evening. And I think it's probably evening for all of us here. If you're joining us from a part of the world where it's morning or night, then you're also very welcome, and we're very glad to have you here. My name is Rachel Julian. I'm a professor of peace studies at Leeds Beckett University in the UK, and it is my very great honour to be here with you all today and to welcome to this our global book launch of our book and that you have all written, and a very amazing welcome to the editors, to Jonathan and Professor Nagala, and of course to authors and to all of you who have written and worked so hard on this project. To me, this book represents an amazing coming together of knowledge, resilience, and this strong commitment to change that we all share. Our book started at a time when the world was just before the great pandemic crisis. So thanks to some funding that we managed to get from my university, from Leeds Beckett University, we were able to hold the workshop. And I feel very lucky to have been invited by Professor Nagala to help and join you at that workshop. And I even have, I hope, a picture there from the workshop where we all met in Nairobi. And we met in February of 2020, which is remarkable because it was the month before the world shut down, in a sense. And so it feels a very momentous occasion. I remember it very powerfully because I met with all of you and then didn't go anywhere for such a long time that it was very interesting time. And the plans that we had to meet, any plans we had to meet were thwarted. But I know that during that crisis, all of you carried on with the work that we started in the workshop, where you supported one another, the work in revising and developing your knowledge and interest into the chapters that we've got today in this amazing book. The workshop that we all worked together in really was so inspiring. So the photos like this one of us working together remind me of the amazingly high level of support you gave one another. And to me, one of the reasons why this book has been such a success, and bringing those together. So the combination of this book, the contribution to peace and conflict studies, to ensuring that the issues that we talk about are those that are both sort of personal and global, and that affect people, that affect our shared desire for peace and for justice. It's such an important workshop. Your work has been amazing, and I am just so thrilled that we're able to launch this book today. I know I'm lucky enough to be one of the people with an actual physical copy of the book, and it's here treasured and on display and shared with my colleagues here as well. And so thank you very much for coming today. I'm really interested to hear how you've got on and what this work means to you. And again, thank you very much for all your work to make this happen. So he's got it might be Scholastica. I can't see. I think if you just mute for a minute. Yeah, super, thank you. So we have a full programme of people to talk, and I'd first like to ask Jonathan, would you be able to talk, or is Professor Nagala, are you able to talk a bit about the development of the book?
Yeah, Prof. Nagala, would you like to say a few words and then I can follow you? Prof. Ngala, are you with us? Well, maybe as we're waiting for Prof. Ngala, Rachel, I'm happy to say a few words. So it is just to reiterate what a pleasure and privilege it is to play a role in bringing this edited volume together. And I'm just really grateful to you, Professor Julian, and to Professor Ngala for kicking this off and then bringing me on board to try to support the process. And I just wanted to say a few words about the kind of how special the project is. I've been working in Africa for a number of years, and I think these type of projects where there's a true collaboration are very unique and special, and somewhat of a rarity, to be honest. And so it's in that sense, it's really I'm very grateful to be involved in it because it is something that I think doesn't happen often, and I really hope that it can happen more, and that this kind of collaboration can be a model for these kinds of projects that are focused on advancing African scholarship, which is really important for peace studies. And so in that way, I think I just wanted to say a few words in terms of the we had a lot of discussion between the editors about what is the innovation of the book, and so I just kind of wanted to mention three things that are that I think are special about the process for the book, both from the conception as an idea, through the collaborative nature of the authors thinking through their ideas in the workshop that Professor Rachel mentioned in Nairobi, and then through the writing and editing process leading to the completion of the manuscript. And so just to mention briefly, it's I think the book is innovative as a process, and that is bringing together African authors to produce original research and writing on peace studies, and innovative in how we link diverse aspects of peace together into a uniform book. And again, this was accomplished initially in sort of a very organic and collaborative process of the authors having a chance to sit in person together over the course of 3 to 4 days, and just share ideas, right, about research that they were doing, get feedback on that research. And that workshop was truly special in that sense. It really was a very robust discussion that was collaborative in nature. And then thirdly, and in the feedback that I think we've received from the book, from those that have read it, it really is unique to have this diversity of disciplines and topics represented in the book, and sort of a novel analyses from an African view. And this is so incredibly important because it really puts a spotlight on the views of local communities, which are often, or not often, always very, very complex. And introducing that complexity into the analyses that the authors have done is fundamentally important, and really is sort of a representation of how I think, and Professor Ngala mentioned this in the preface to the book, that Africa is rich in cutting edge research and practice, and I think that diversity really is represented in this volume in a really special way. So with that, I don't want to talk very long, but just to give a big congratulations to the authors in completing the book. As Professor Rachel said, this was done under very difficult circumstances. When we wrapped the workshop, the first wave of the pandemic hit Nairobi. Literally, like a few days later, we started to see the first cases, and the authors just represented just incredible resilience and determination in completing completing their chapters, working with us through the editorial process over the course of, what was it, about more over a year and a half, 2 years. So just a huge congratulations to them. They made this book happen in that sense. So I was really grateful to be a part of the process.
Thank you indeed. It is very special. Professor Ngala, please join us. We can't hear you. Okay. Hopefully, Professor Nagala, you'll be able to join us and talk, John. But I think it's time that we hear from you, authors. Tell us a little bit about the chapter that you've contributed and the process and your thoughts on it. I think probably the easiest thing is to go through the order in the book, because then you can see the sort of like the great diversity that we have. And so yes, indeed, Matilda Massino, you have the very first chapter on inculcating the peace innovation approach in shaping the future of peace and security in Africa. So a great topic, and please take the floor and tell us.
Thank you so much, Gillian, and the rest of the team, Professor Ngala and Jonathan. Thank you so much for the great work and the support you guys gave us during the process of writing the chapters. So mine is just briefly to highlight some of the areas which I felt really drove me to writing this chapter. So, just by looking at the African continent and how it is conflict prone, it gave me the impetus to want to at least do something in terms of having a research base and creating a foundation for future researchers and future practitioners in peace to just have an idea of what has been happening. So for me, it was a very interesting process. The back and forth was pretty interesting. The long wait and the COVID interruptions, those were also quite, well, a bit demoralizing, but still we pushed on, and with the encouragement of the team here in Kenya, as well as the team in the UK, we got this through. And so thank you. Hats off to all of you. Thank you so much. So just looking at the African continent, which is conflict prone, I wanted to see how do we build up on an aspect of peace that is not really common within Africa. So I decided to look at the peace innovation approach in dealing with conflict within the continent. So of course we know there are big gaps, and right now we can acknowledge there are big gaps looking at what is happening in Ukraine as well as what is happening in Israel. So Africa is no different from those other countries. So so those are the gaps I was trying to fill, using innovative ways in which to secure our peace within the continent, and especially within our country, Kenya, just to build up on the information that we already have to see how can we make it better. So through my research, I took a step back to look at the important ways in which the global systems have been working and how those have actually advised or driven the peace aspects in our continent. So of course, over time, we've had failed infrastructures and institutions that have been built on neo-colonial values. And so looking at those practices which relate to the colonialist and imperialist policies from before and slavery, of course, those also were a way that built up to the conflicts that we've been having in Africa for a long period of time. But now getting down to what now can we do in Africa as a continent, my recommendation, or just my findings, drove me to just assessing and seeing that we need to push the research frontiers forward so that we help innovators develop better ways to prevent violence and promote peace. And then also using state-of-the-art peace research to maximize chances to develop more support and human security and building peace within the continent, as well as in the field of peace studies, not just looking at it as theory, but also looking at the practical ways in which we can push forward the peace agenda, and then using innovation to push the process forward by engaging diverse groups, either at the grassroots level, at the national, at the international levels, just to ensure that we are maintaining peace within the continent. And then the legitimacy, of course, among international and local stakeholders came out as a very crucial part of achieving sustainable peace for the continent of Kenya. So maintaining that legitimacy in order to enable us to, of course, move forward and ensure that there is lasting and sustainable peace. So my recommendations were that there is still much more to be done in the study of peace and innovation, of course, but advocates and practitioners can still shape and develop the field by curating and generating more knowledge, as well as more practical information around the issue of peace and conflict, and then creating conditions which formalize collaboration between stakeholders so that we can find solutions to the complex conflict issues that we face as a continent, and then having, or rather demonstrating, great collaborations in coming to the negotiating table to address differences within the different groups that are having the conflict within either the local aspects or the continental areas, because we do know that we have cross-boundary issues. So just having a space where we can bring all the players on the same table to negotiate and agree and discuss. Then some of the factors like the third party and intergovernmental state and non-state variances of players who are willing to support peace settlements. So we need to encourage that to happen more, because then we are able to deal with the issues of conflict, and then addressing addressing the issue of conflict in a peaceful and sustainable manner. So from my experience, it was really nice, and I am glad that it came to this conclusion, the publication, and of course, thank you so much for all your support.
Thank you very much. And I forgot to say, Matilda, please introduce yourself. Are you at Tangaza University?
Yes, I am. I'm at Tangaza University.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. That's, yeah, it's really important, your work. So yeah, please.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jonathan, do you want to introduce the next author? You
Absolutely.
work so closely with everybody.
Of course. So just to say, I really love how Matilda's chapter, as she just mentioned, it just really is a nice kind of framing, opening chapter for the rest of the author's analysis. And it's just really a perfect kind of delineation of how we should think about peace in a holistic way, as Matilda just mentioned, as we're thinking through the instability experienced by communities. So our next chapter is by Patrick Mugo, who is, I'll let him introduce himself as well, but he's a very seasoned journalist, peace researcher in the region, and a producer with the Al Jazeera network. And Mugo's chapter is really, really wonderful in taking account of some of the complexity that Matilda just mentioned, and looking at specifically in rural Kenya, and thinking about a really fascinating analysis of how we should think about how communities should be given the space to think through innovations in peace, and how that kind of space can allow different approaches to ripen as communities are trying to deal with conflict. But I'll let Mugo talk. He'll do a much better job of explaining his chapter.
Okay, greetings to everyone. You can hear me? Okay. Yes, my name is Patrick Mugo. I'm a journalist with Al Jazeera Television, but also have an interest in peace research. And it happens that one of the few people who didn't attend the seminar, but also participated in writing a chapter. I missed the seminar, but also came involved with the chapter. So thanks for those who invited me and for inclusion. It was a good journey for me. And mainly, going to my chapter is that it's a conversation I had long time ago with my grandfather, having fought for independence in this country as a Mau Mau fighter. It happens that today and the last 2 or 3 days, King Charles is around. These discussions are being discussed in Kenya today. And there is a conversation about should we go beyond deep sorrows and an apology. But my grandfather moved away from there, and his disappointment was at his old age that although they fight for independence, they gained independence. His conversation with me was almost like the third generation of the independence. It was almost like feeling like we fought for independence, but we never got what we wanted. And your life might be more miserable than what we anticipated. To him, like growing up as a young man, probably he had a better background because by then the colonization had not entrenched itself. But when he's coming to the end of his life, he's talking about how dispossession, how inequality have conspired together and brought about insecurity. And his argument was he might not have studied peace and everything, but he understood that for there to be peace, togetherness and interaction, there has to be an equal society. And his outcry, that is when he's telling me that, by the way, I'll be gone. He's gone now. And you might never live in this village. It's a reality. I don't live there now. I go there occasionally as a visitor, and it's happening as a reality in most of central Kenya. People have relocated, moved away from rural villages and come to town. So his only concern was that insecurity has been going on at the community level, and because Kikuyu tend to have been more affected by colonization because of social structure, dispossession, displacement, and the taking away of the land meant that the Kikuyu lost much of their land. The population is increasing. So that is what I'm trying to talk in the book, is that this community seems to be almost like struggling to survive, to stay together and thrive. And that has brought about the issue of the migration of the Kikuyus across the country, because the land was taken away, the people have become many, and there is nothing there in the village. And that is what I'm now saying is a conversation with my grandfather, looking at it. Then over time, I have to interrogate myself. What was he talking about? What is he saying? But the interaction in terms of what I gathered from him is that although we talk about peace, we talk about how to implement it, how to resolve conflict. His argument is that we need to think beyond, we need to go beyond and involve the community at the grassroots level. If the Kikuyu community, the factor of production is land, you can't be talking about peace if you don't represent a concept of how that can be acquired, or how that can be accessed. Because not everybody will get educated, not everybody will get jobs. But there seems to be a kind of development concept in Kenya that prioritizes the economic growth, not economic development. It is not how society is empowered. And that dispossession tends to breed inequality, resentment, and hatred. Then he used to call the leaders in his own way after fighting for independence cannibalists, that they seem to cannibalize their own people for their own benefit. And that is what is bringing this idea that now in my book I talk about we need to go deep and sit down with these communities and look at what do they want? What is it that they think would solve their problem, other than telling them that if I educate you, you get a university degree, you could get a good job and go work in a university or go work in the capital. I might not want to leave the village. But it seems like everybody is running away from the village because there is nothing, there are no resources. Now, the things is changing slightly because of the devolution, but still there needs to be more. We are almost pumping money, is what you can call, maybe if you move away from peace studies, like what we are having in this country or in most of the African countries where I work, is like we are using money to scare away poverty or to scare away insecurity. And that will never happen. We are not sitting down and interrogating and sitting with the people and asking them, what do you need? How do I help you? What is it that you want? We seem to be calling and telling a person, this is the blueprint I have, and this is what needs to be done. And that is what my grandfather is talking about. This is not what we fought for independence. And that is a conversation that I'm bringing through the chaos theory, that we look at conflict, inequality, dispossession, chaos at the rural level as an opportunity to which we can interrogate deeply and start asking yourself, my brother might want to be a teacher, but I might want to be a farmer. So how do you help the two of us not to feel that I am left out because I never got into school? And that is a debate that I'm having in this chapter, that across Africa, where I work in Congo or in Somalia or in other countries, you go and you meet people, the peace accord is signed in the capital, but in terms of implementation, the government people who are supposed to implement it are also the exploiters, the beneficiary, the obstacles, and they have left with it like, okay, this is a book, this is the peace accord, implement it. And it doesn't get to the ground. And what we are having is a continued dispossession, continued hatred, the community is getting divided. And that is a debate that I am trying to bring forth, that we need to move beyond the surface and go deep and bring the community on the table and listen to what they want. I will stop there and maybe let the other people to have a conversation.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mugo. Your chapter is it's super interesting, especially your analysis beginning with your conversations with your grandfather. It really gives just a wonderful personal touch to the chapter. I think it's also, just to maybe mention 2 points. One, really starting with the frustrations and grievances of the community and thinking about solutions to peace or to conflict and insecurity. And in this way that you foreground human dignity and empowerment, I think this is really important as we think through achieving peace and securing livelihoods connected to the problem of economic insecurity and dispossession that you mentioned. Okay, so let's go to the next 2 chapters, which are also wonderful, wonderful chapters. And as we were editing the book, these kind of came together very well as what we thought of as companion pieces that explore the psychological impacts of violence from different views. Scholastica Mrenya, who was a PhD candidate at Tangazi University College in Nairobi, she kind of looks at the approaches this question of trauma and violence from sort of a individual and community view. And then Nellie Kibet, who is a researcher with Hakima Peace Institute in Nairobi, she kind of looks at trauma and connected to violence at the leadership level. And both of these these are just novel approaches in thinking about trauma. And so they kind of fit together very well and give a nice kind of expansive view of analyses that kind of interrogate trauma and try to better understand it. So let's start with Scholastica, and then we'll move to Nellie. Scholastica, please take the floor.
You're just on mute at the moment, Scholastica. Start again so we can hear everything.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Now you can hear me? Can you?
Yes, we can hear you great now. Thank you.
All right. Firstly, I want to thank all of you for being with you today and for giving us this opportunity to do a book chapter. I wrote about conflict-related sexual violence because I've worked with people who are actually survivors of the post-election violence in Kenya. And I've also seen how they've been traumatized, they've been affected, and yet people have not been held accountable for all that happened to them. And I also don't find a lot of literature in the Kenyan context talking about this sexual violence, and especially in terms of how people are coping with sexual violence. Most of what we have in literature are the causes of sexual violence, the trends of sexual violence, and the consequences to a small degree. But in terms of how the survivors are coping, there's very little you find either globally or even nationally here. So that actually was why I was interested in conflict-related sexual violence. And as we know, even right now with the conflicts that are going on globally, sexual violence is still very persistent and prominent, despite all the efforts that have been made to make it considered a crime against humanity, to make it considered even genocide. Still, it is going on. And the question that we ask ourselves is why? Why does it persist despite all these efforts by the UN, by country, state parties, and others? It continues to persist. And from my work, I've tried to outline some of the causes. Why does it persist? I've also tried to outline who are the perpetrators. And what has come out in the recent past is that because there are so many perpetrators of conflict-related sexual violence, sometimes attribution becomes very difficult because it is thought mostly that it is the combatants that sometimes are the major perpetrators, but it has also been realized that civilians can be perpetrators as well as state security apparatus. And in the post-election violence in Kenya, it was very common to hear survivors talk about the police being the perpetrators of sexual violence. And yet these were the same people they were supposed to report to. Hence, it became very difficult even for some survivors to report the cases. And this has not been sorted out until today because there are still instances of state security apparatus and state security people actually being the perpetrators, and yet they're never held to account. So what happens to such like victims? The same way with the conflicts that happen in the rural areas, even where the militia are the perpetrators, we still also find that they're never held to account. So accountability has remained a big problem. And yet these are people, sometimes people stay within the same community. So you see them, you interact with them, yet they violated you and there's nothing you can do about it. And this then makes even the trauma worse for people. But it has also been found that there's some people who, despite this trauma, actually thrive, while others suffer silently and have almost like long-lasting wounds. There are some people who thrive through the system. And hence this study was also trying to find out, how do these people cope? Why are there that there are some people who are actually thriving while some people are not? And from the right, this was, I intended it to go to the field to do some field work, but as you people indicated, it was during the COVID period, so I wasn't able to. So most of the work was done as a desktop review, but I've also had a chance of talking to a few survivors. So from the desktop review, one thing that came out very clearly is that conflict-related sexual violence is common in Kenya, and it's especially common during elections, especially where there is contested elections, and mainly occurs in areas where there are opposing political parties, especially for Kenya. We now know that we are almost having like two political parties that are really, really serious parties that elicit such emotions. And that is the opposition party now, and maybe UDA, the ruling party, which continues to metamorphosize in each election. So wherever these two parties have very closely contested elections, we are almost certain that there's some kind of conflict that will occur. But one of the authors has clearly indicated that in Kenya, we have a lot of conflict. And according to Riley, between 1997 and 2013, actually Kenya had over 3,500 violent conflicts. You know, we only think about the big one like the elections, but there are many others in the villages. Like I know the North Rift of Kenya is rampant. It's prone. Conflict is very prone. Sexual violence happens, but nobody talks about it. The same with Western Kenya, some regions, nobody talks about it. So we have over-focused on the electoral-related ones and forgotten about maybe the inter-ethnic ones, the natural resource-based ones, and others that are very common. And these are actually driven by, as I said, politics, natural resources, proliferation of arms, which has become so common in the ethnic intolerance. Now, the 2007-2008 conflict, actually there were over 9,000 reported cases, meaning there were more. And the perpetrators, as I've said, were state security apparatus. There were also militias, and there are also civilians. Majorly for the civilians, especially I don't know whether to call them the political militia or the community militia, they were just out to humiliate the opposing voters. If they perceived you to have voted for a party that was not a majority in a region, you are just being humiliated. And the women and girls bore the brunt of it, but also the men. There was forced circumcision, sometimes they would cut the genitalia out, sometimes they will sodomize the men and boys. So it was a very common, crime at that point. And the consequences of this have been very grave, and they have been documented by several NGOs. Unfortunately, I couldn't get government documentation apart from the report by I think there was a task force at that time that actually documented the 900 cases. But then the consequences have been poor health, especially in terms of spread of STDs and HIV. And I think the Human Rights Watch report has indicated that over 30% of the people they talked to, they interview, actually contracted HIV during that time. There's also been cases of forced circumcisions and also a lot of psychological trauma, which has led to most people suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And there have been studies that have shown that over 90% of people who were in the IDP camps back then were actually having different psychological stresses. Then there was also a lot of children born out of war or out of rape. I hear there is a good name for it. So children born out of rape, and these kind of children have faced social rejection, and sometimes even their parents, the mothers, have rejected them. And I have met at least 2 girls who got pregnant at that time. Both said they were raped by policemen and the security men who came to their rescue, who do not even want to see these children. They don't even want to name the children. So the children have been left with their grandparents back at home, and the mothers rarely even go home to interact with the children. Yet our country, from my study, has no system of absorbing these children. It is left to the society to deal with them, yet the society also considers them children of enemies. So we find that has been a consequence that has not been dealt with until today and still lingers. And as this sexual violence continues, such more children are being born. There were also cases of divorce and spousal rejection, where whenever a spouse was informed you had been raped, most of them just stopped associating with the woman. So that has also been a big problem. And as a result of all these problems, people sought help from the government, but government services have been very limited. That is also recorded in terms of offering psychosocial support. That has been limited. In terms of offering judicial redress, I think it's only in late 2020, 2021, that the High Court actually ruled that the government had failed in prosecuting cases of post-election sexual violence, and awarded some 4 ladies compensation. And that has only been the only case that have been ruled out, convicted and ruled. Yet there are almost now 890 something cases that were recorded, but nobody has been held to account. And from the literature, in terms of coping, the main coping mechanisms that have been used by the survivors has been either silence because of fear of stigma and embarrassment. Most of them have just not talked about it. because they think if you talk about it, the society will view you negatively, you will be shunned, and you will be ostracized. So most of them are quiet. Some of them have also developed avoidance mechanisms. They have isolated themselves and rarely speak about what their experiences, nor go into public in places where such things can occur or people can mention that there were cases like that. And this is also a problem, especially whenever the elections are coming. People are again re-traumatized and scared because they feel that this can occur again. Yet the problem-focused mechanisms for coping are not in place. What can be used to ensure that people are well prepared, people are well protected before such incidences occur? Kenya still has not put that in place. Another coping mechanism that has been used extensively is social coping, and especially by NGOs. They've tried to do sociotherapy, helping the survivors to form groups, offering them group therapy, and sometimes also offering them economic empowerment. And it has been realized that though this kind of groups offer solidarity and belonging, and at least have given these women and girls and men and boys a chance to thrive. And most of the survivors that look like they're thriving are those that actually are in groups, social groups, and have gone through counseling. But the counseling has been very, very limited, and it's mostly in towns. Yet some of these people have relocated to the villages and are mostly found in the informal settlements. So in short, most of the coping mechanisms employed by the survivors in Kenya, and in this case, have been their own initiative. Either you going to church, spiritual, maybe using spiritual people, spiritual religious leaders, or through forming those social groups, or in very little instances, NGOs have come up to help them get psychosocial support. So there's still a lot to be done because of the limited services in terms of medical, judicial, and even psychosocial support for these people. And there's need in terms of recommendations for the government to find ways of enhancing services to the post-election violence victims, even though the courts have already found that actually the government failed them. So even in this failure, the government should do something so that at least going forward, they can feel that their needs are being catered for. I've also proposed that there's need for survivor-centered approach to addressing the issues of conflict-related sexual violence, because most of the time, the assistance gotten does not take into account the needs of the survivors themselves. I'm also proposing for a lot of community sensitization in terms of ensuring that there's community counseling, family counseling, so that the survivors are actually get the support, because studies have shown that where people thrive after such incidences, community and familial support is very important. They need to have social relations and structures that can help them. But unfortunately, our cultures stigmatize people who have been sexually violated. Rather than embrace them and offer support, they're stigmatized. And hence this calls for, one, working with the Council of Elders, and I think most of Kenya has now Council of Elders who have a lot of sway in terms of how communities relate, to actually ensure that people start embracing and treating survivors as victims and not looking at them as people who have betrayed the society. And also working with their families and working with the communities in terms of not only counseling, but also ensuring ways and means of embracing these people and offering them that support that they require. And then finally, I will also want to say that unless survivors are held to account and there's a cost to committing sexual violence, this will always happen. In Kenya today, no perpetrator has been held to account since 2007. And hence, there's a lot of impunity and a lot of feeling that even if if I do this, nothing will happen to me. So the government should have policies that ensure that perpetrators, whoever they are held accountable, to ensure that there's deterrence in future. Because even in the 2017 election, still there was sexual violence, and it was documented. Around 210 cases were documented. And even in the current conflicts, there's sexual violence, yet there's still no proper services in place to ensure that survivors actually thrive and are not victimized. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scholastica. I really am struck by your chapter. You just very ably navigated what I think is very difficult terrain. And you did so in a way that really foregrounded the voices of survivors. You mentioned the challenges of doing field work during COVID, and those challenges were very real. But for everyone with us today, if you read Scholastica's chapter, she just weaves in narrative accounts from survivors into her analysis, which is very powerful. So thank you, Scholastica. It was really an excellent job, and also this novel contribution you have of kind of explaining how coping methods can be a key variable in explaining the different trajectories of victims' experiences, whether they're positive or negative post-violence. So very, very interesting analysis.
Thank you.
Nelly, you are up next to follow Scholastica's analysis. And as I mentioned, Nelly, in a very, very interesting and compelling way, connects experiences of trauma at the leadership level, which is really fascinating. So Nelly, please take the floor.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's really a delight to get to this point, and really appreciate the opportunity to participate, and really special appreciation to Professor Ngala, Professor Julian, and Jonathan and my colleagues for the encouragement and getting us here. So this is really a great milestone. I prepared a presentation, but I am going to just summarize as all my colleagues have done. So, so my chapter is titled Transcending Inward Brokenness for Growth, a Determinant of Transformative Leadership. And so the focus is more of looking at the strategic leadership. And so in talking more of what Scholar was talking about, but also looking at what trauma impacts leadership, and how then can we find ways to fill that gap. So this is really interesting because this is an area that weaves two areas that are very close to my heart, which is psychology and then the peace aspects. So we all know that civil wars and armed conflicts really leave behind visible and equally invisible impacts across societal strata. So on the lower strata, we find the civilians and everybody else within the sphere in a country. And on the higher sphere, we find leaders who are at the strategic positions and levels. So looking at studies, mostly it focuses on women, it focuses on children, it focuses on civilians and how they are impacted by the violence conflicts, but limited as studies have focused on how violent conflicts affect and impact leaders and their governance models. So yet, when you look in depth, you see that leaders in post-conflict societies really have a central role in reconstructing and rebuilding beyond the trauma that they go through. And so the central argument of this chapter is how then do we turn the political action and leadership of these leaders to have a positive outcome despite the circumstance that they go through during, like, maybe going through a crisis. So this chapter, I was looking at, I used the post-traumatic growth theory and trauma model of violence to cross-examine the leadership of Paul Kagame of Rwanda and Salva Kiir of South Sudan, to actually analyze why some individuals thrive and grow beyond tragedy. It could be civil war, it could be genocide, as was the case of these particular countries we are looking at. And yet, on another one, we can see that one has stagnated and succumbed. Could it be that there was trauma that was suffered and one was able to process and used it to grow his country, and another one stagnated because could not process or is still in the process of addressing that? So using the post-traumatic growth theory, which then focuses on the positive changes that occurs after an individual goes through a highly challenging event, I was looking at the three criteria that usually determine the determination that somebody has grown beyond a suffered trauma. And so I was looking at the greater sense of autonomy, enhanced intrapersonal and interpersonal relationships, and new sense of meaning that we see in Paul Kagame's leadership and how he's been able to lead his country to where it is in the region and even globally. And on this other end, using the trauma model of violence to argue and look at how trauma can really contribute to cyclic violence. And even in the case of South Sudan, where we see Salva Kiir and his leadership and his in its governance, they've had several peace agreements that in one or another stagnate, and the country seem not to be moving ahead as like, and yet both of them really have gone through highly stressful, high crisis times in their country. And so in this examination, then the central argument is just to look at what is it that Salva Kiir is not doing that his counterpart in Rwanda is doing, and generally just seeing that leaders, if they are well supported to transcend beyond the broken inner struggles, they're able to actually advocate for reconciliation and post-conflict reconstruction of their states, or on the other side, to further distract their nations based on maybe the decisions that they tend to make. And so what are some of the main reflections that I draw and argue as a close for this particular chapter is that trauma has profound effects on one's emotional intelligence, and that means even how they're able to make decisions. And so that impacts how self-aware they are. It impacts their conflict management capacities, as well as it kind of narrows. When you are traumatized, your window of tolerance is narrowed. So then that means one way to be able to help or support leaders who have gone through like crisis is first to strengthen their emotional intelligence so that they are more self-aware. They were able to expand their window of tolerance because trauma has a way of triggering how we respond to circumstances or situations. And so with that, being able to support leaders to be self-aware and to actually support them to see the importance of not only having, you see, our leaders usually have legal advisors, you find another economic advisor, and all these kind of advisors. But we don't really think and go ahead and think, oh, maybe they actually need psychological advisors. Maybe they need to seek professional psychological support. And so I really am advocating for that kind of support for our leaders, because it's through them addressing their inner struggles that they're able to inform key like political action and leadership that is geared towards supporting the greater populace. And it's also interesting to note that most of our leaders are men or male. And so even seeking psychosocial support is really a challenge because of the stigma around it. And so a lot of mental health awareness, not only when we are focusing on a majority of the population, but also just focus on their strategic leadership. Because if they have it right with themselves, then they have it right with generally the population. And in that chapter, there's a place where I discuss about intergenerational trauma and likening a parent to a leader, and how if the wounds of one generation are not dealt with, then you tend to bleed to the next generation. And so if we are not, as a parent, equating the leaders as parents, if we are not able to support them to deal and address their inner struggles, they will bleed to the next generation.
Book launch.
Sorry. The next generation, and to the detriment of the population. And finally, in conclusion, most stakeholders in post-conflict reconstruction usually focus on, as I mentioned, that just common population, but I'm really advocating for mental health literacy in proactive coping methods and prioritizing psychological health of leaders. This then would lead to achievement of positive peace in post-conflict societies, because if we don't help these leaders, then we will not achieve positive peace, but we'll have negative peace reigning, and after years, we might slide back to what we don't want to see in our continent and beyond. So thank you so much, and it's really exciting to be at this point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nellie, thank you so much. Your chapter is so interesting. I really love your discussion of emotional intelligence amongst leaders, and this particular policy recommendation of a psychological advisor is really powerful. And you know, for myself, I think a lot in my own research and work about transitions away from civil conflict, and it is really a novel contribution that you're bringing in terms of thinking about this dimension of the psychological health of leaders who have a lot of power and influence, obviously, in the trajectory of post-conflict reconstruction, and sort of trying to put the society back together, which is often very broken. So very, very essential analysis. And as you were just talking, I was thinking about one of our reviewers for the book, and they use this, and they were talking about all of your chapters, but they use this turn of phrase, breath of fresh air. And so when you were just discussing your chapter, I was thinking about that. It is a breath of fresh air as we're thinking about these post-conflict settings. Okay, so let's move to our next excellent author, which is Joe Joseph, and he is a PhD. He's also pursuing his PhD, and at different points he has served as a lecturer, including at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa, and he extends, I think, very persuasively a discussion of psychological health, particularly in the context of PTSD-associated alcohol abuse. So Joseph, please take the floor and talk more about your chapter.
Thank you, Dr. Jonathan, and thank you everyone
for this opportunity. I'll start by saying that this chapter, it was wonderful. And from what the country is going right now, we can experience and we can see it so well what I was talking about that chapter. So my chapter was a systematic review on the effect of post-traumatic stress disorder, associated alcohol abuse on socio-economic status. And this, in this case, it is among youth living in Kiambu County. This is part of near to Nairobi. So what I would say about alcohol abuse, it is a preference issue among Kenyan youth, with approximately 45 to 50% of those in Kiambu County suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder in 2018, and that is before COVID-19. And you can imagine right now how rampant it is. Then the concurrence of PTSD and alcohol abuse has significant consequences for the affected youth, impacting their education, employment prospect, and the socio-economic status. And in this case, you can see even right now, people, they are allowed Kiambu and allowed the country, because this presents the whole country. You can see people, they are frustrated, especially for the youth, because of the employment. They are frustrated because of the education. Like recently, there is someone who finished university, and he was frustrated because he could not get a job, rather than creating one and also being creative. So in this chapter overview, I examine into the present issue of alcohol abuse and its connection to post-traumatic stress disorder, and among Kenyan youth, focusing on the specific case of Kiambu County. So it will review existing literature to shed light on the challenges facing by the demographic and the potential policy solution that could alleviate their suffering. And I remember yesterday, there was an officer who was supposed to guard the examination, national examination, and he was caught drunk. And you can see this is a challenge, and he was a youth. And you can see this. This is a very big challenge. What are the key policies, implications in this chapter, which I highlighted? One, psychosocial support mechanism, which I propose that implementing psychosocial support system for youth struggling with alcohol abuse and PTSD is crucial. Providing counseling and therapy can help them address their mental health issue and addiction simultaneously. Second, rehabilitation funding. The government should allocate funding for the rehabilitation of youth suffering from PTSD associated with alcohol abuse. This financial support can enable them to access proper treatment and recovery programs. Third, empowerment program. That is, government-sponsored empowerment programs should be tailored to include youth dealing with dual burden, such as program can offer financial assistance and the training to enhance their socio-economic, helping them to rebuild their life. So, fourth, education and awareness. That is, raise awareness and provide education on the risk and the consequences of alcohol abuse and PTSD to both the youth and the broader community. And in this case, I remember this year we started a program where we are addressing the trauma-focused therapy training in our community, because it is a threat in our in the national security. And I remember the deputy president talking about it in the central region, that they need to address the issue of alcohol. It has become an issue of the national security. And this can help prevent future cases and promote a more supportive environment. The final thing, it is research and data correction. That is, invest in further research and data correction to better understanding the extent of the problem. It is underlying causes and the effectiveness of policy intervention. This will enable evidence-based policy making. So therefore, what are we saying? Addressing the intersection of the alcohol abuse and the PTSD among Kenyan youth requires a comprehensive approach that combines mental health support, rehabilitation, empowerment, education, and the ongoing research efforts to improve the well-being and prospect of the vulnerable population. So thank you so much for this opportunity and for your support and for your patience, even back forth. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Joseph. I really appreciate that overview. I also appreciate the connection that you're making with peace and security in terms of alcohol abuse, and kind of how, you know, if you're thinking about tackling these challenges, alcohol abuse has this very clear, as you demonstrate in your chapter, clear impact on economic productivity, post-secondary education, and all of these factors are very much very much important to address if we're thinking about tackling solutions for peace and security. I also appreciate the specificity and very concrete and practical policy recommendations. Like what you outline are things, in theory, the government could do tomorrow in terms of implementation. So thank you very much. So our last two authors very sadly can't be with us today, and that is Michelle Nyandong and Mercy Mwendo. They both send their regrets for not being able to attend. Professor Rachel, how would you like to proceed? Do you want to, or you tell me, how would you like to go from here?
So so firstly, thank you very much to you all. One of the things that I really loved about all of your chapters, and indeed the presentations that you've made here, is the way you're really bringing in some important issues that are sometimes forgotten about when we talk about peace and security, particularly in Africa, but also, as many of you have said, in other countries as well. And I think that's a really good aspect to the work that you've all done. So we do have some time. So we have some questions. So we have time for questions. So if any of our audience, or you would like to ask questions of one another, of course, we can. We've got some time for that. But while you're maybe thinking of questions, one of the ideas I had is that we could, where we're recording this, and is maybe if we got some video presentations from the other authors and made it together. So we actually had a video presentation of the book. Because nowadays it's very common for when people write a paper or write chapters or books, for them to make a little video talking about it, which is then in some ways makes the written word very accessible to people. And also there's something very interesting about hearing people like present in their own voice and their own mannerisms, and I love the confidence that you're all presenting your work with. It's just so inspiring, because you're really tackling the really tough issues of people and places who are harmed by violence and structures and societal systems that are making it very hard for people to live, and that's very difficult to do. So I really appreciate the commitment and the care that you do your work with, and have presented it here. So let's see if there are questions. Oh, thanks, Aidan. Yes, so we've got someone to help moderate us. So if you have a question, anybody who's welcome here today, you can raise your hand, you can put it in chat, and we can to read it out. One of the things that I'm going to start while you're all thinking of good questions. So one of the things that quite a lot of you talk about or think about is I mean, some of you very explicitly, like Nelly, into like the psychological element of dealing with harm and trauma, but also the impact that has on the way we think about what has to be done in order to create peace and security. And I wonder whether any of you would like to sort of like talk about, we miss this out, I think, in many forms of analysis around peace and creating security. And I wondered if any of you had any ideas on how we maybe bring more psychologists or more aspects of that work into thinking about building peace across communities and across countries. Might be too difficult a question. You can start from where you can start from the work you're doing. Nobody willing to try that. Can you think of so I don't know whether thank you, Jackie.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm really excited and I'm smiling all through. And I was so excited when I had Nelly Kibet present. And I agree that psychological support would help in so many things. And we must agree that sometimes, you know, like the theory that sorry, someone has just informed me that I've not introduced myself. My name, sorry, that was rude. My name is Jackie Mwango. I was invited by Professor Joseph Ngala. He's our friend. And I'm interested in studying, doing my master's in social transformation and specializing in governance, possibly from January. So this is a safe place for me to actually just interact with people. So I agree with you that psychological support would help us deal with so many things that some pass unnoticed, and sometimes we feel things are right, yet they are not right. And I like the way Nelly presented that she applied post-traumatic growth theory. That's a very rich theory, and I'm sure if that is applied in whichever country, whatever circumstance, things are going to be better. And so I would wish that, I just hope that this will one time happen, that in our communities, various communities that we are in, be it in school, at working places, or just any village, we would have at least some psychologists that would support the community in whichever way. We hear many people nowadays, they are killing their spouses, some are even killing their children, and some are committing suicide. So if we have such people and the psychologists create safe space for the community to come and actually just talk about what is bothering them, and they work with the psychologist, this will actually help, and it will reduce so many issues that we have that can be avoided. And and also training for people, like in Kenya, we have a group of health workers that are called CHVs, community health workers. And if we train them on basic counseling skills, psychological counseling skills, this one will help us to reach deep down in the interior places that we feel like It's so difficult to reach. So if we use them, they will, if we train them, they will be able to actually support up to some extent to give that individual some strength to look for now a psychologist that is now well trained and is well qualified and is licensed to take care of different kind of issues. Some people thrive in crisis, and some of them don't thrive because they are strong, but they thrive because they want to suppress the problem and just wear a happy face. Yet deep inside, they are crying and they're actually burning. And some of these people, if they're ignored and we just say, oh, so and so is very strong, one time they will just get a trigger. And these are the people that you will hear that they've died of depression, yet we could prevent that, or they've killed somebody that just triggered them. And so I hope that can one time happen in our country, Kenya, and all the other countries that are presented here. So thank you very much. I could talk more, but because of time, thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really useful and interesting about sort of like there are things that we could do, steps we could take to go forward on this. Thank you. Nelly, do you want to comment or reply, or made you think of something?
Okay, yeah, sure. So thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Ado. So in addition to Jackie's contribution, I strongly believe that we also need to destigmatize mental health concerns, because most of the time those suffering from like mental health issues find it difficult to speak out. And so and looking at the trauma model of violence, where if like you don't actually get to address the trauma, and particularly using nonviolence as an approach, because that is the best approach or the only best alternative that most of those who've gone through crisis. And so that means if we are able to destigmatize and help them to actually seek support, that's one way in a grand scale of encouraging people to choose nonviolent approaches to addressing issues. Another thing is mental health first aiders, in addition to the CHVs that Jackie mentioned, as well as encouraging conflict-sensitive approaches in our programming and even in policies, just ensuring that policies and programs are centered on conflict-sensitive approaches. That way, it doesn't only happen at the micro level, but also at the macro level. And finally, I think also getting, I was just going through a list of peace psychologists that we have in the world, and really sadly, we have, if any, in Africa, like really, I don't know whether we have, like just very few of them upcoming. And yet this is a very rich area to merge both and be able to contribute, because we might have the CHVs, we have the mental health first aiders, but we also need like technical knowledge towards to contribute to, like, also at the level of policy making, because without policies that are like sensitive to these challenges that we are talking about, it's very difficult to be able to address the issues at the lower level. So I think those are my thoughts and contribution to that question. Thank you.
Yes, please.
But Nelly, we have three experts here today. We have you, Joseph, and Scholastica.
So we have the experts in the room. Patrick, were you going to join? Comment.
Okay, adding to the debate, I'll speak to two of the experiences at what we are calling about psychosocial support or psychologists in the peace studies. If you look at it in terms of Africa, the whole colonization was a very traumatic experience, and probably we haven't recovered from that. We are still struggling. Then you had very dispossessing and very exploitative leadership in post-independence scenarios. And in most of, when I'll speak about my own experience in covering the region, in Kenya, some pockets of Kenya, Congo, Somalia, you interact with the people who have suffered very extreme violence, especially in Congo. And when you look at them, you meet them in the IDP camps, you talk to them, and some of the experience they have gone through, you don't expect that person to be told that peace has returned in your village, relocate from an IDP camp, go back home and settle. That person can never settle. Then when you talk about what I was talking in my chapter about human dignity, these people have been dispossessed, they don't have anything, or you can't provide for your children, you are being oppressed by the government, by the security forces, or you are being mistreated. And that person can never settle. So there is that need of that counseling or that sessions, either need to be by a professional or a second level of a trained person, just to offer the basic. Then you talk about the security agent. I keep saying we can talk about the police reform, we can talk about the structuring, but as long we don't provide the psychological support to counsel some of these people, because some of them do things in the pretext or in the belief that you killed my colleague, that's why I'm attacking you. Or they end up being deployed somewhere and they commit some crimes that, or they witness some of the crimes that they can only be cancelled to be able to work effectively. Some of them, you talk to them and you feel they have anger, they have a level of seeing other human beings as lesser, evil, or even using a gun thinking I can kill you. I had cases standing next to the police and they are planning how to assassinate a guy who is demonstrating because that guy probably has been throwing stones and hitting them. And they are deliberately planning how to assassinate. It's not even how to arrest. Then you ask yourself, what kind of a policemen are these? And they didn't know we were next to them. And we are standing next to them. When they turned around and noted as we were standing to them, is when they said, oh, but you could hear in terms of their mind interrogation and conversation, is a deliberate effort to end a riot. Then you ask yourself, what kind of a person is that standing next to you and protecting you? That person will not protect you. The same in Congo, you find them committing these crimes. They are then deployed or transferred to certain areas, or sometimes they are prosecuted. They go 1 or 2 or 3 months, they come back to the service, but they have not received any counseling. So the probability of that person committing the same crime is very high. Then some of them end up being leaders from security sector. They also rise up and become politicians and they start governing. Then we tend to prioritize them and say, this person was in security, we need them to hand our military, we need them to hand our defense, our internal security. So what kind of a policy will they enforce? What kind of a demand in terms of enforcement will they go for? And they are never cancelled. And those people are within us. So it's a matter of thinking about, as we talk about peace, we also need to think about, before I tell you that you need to implement peace, what state of mind are you? Or even before I tell you that you need to accept to forgive, or even to accept to live with your neighbor, how psychologically are you prepared, or how have you come into terms with some of the experiences, or you are just waiting for a trigger? I keep saying election controversies in Africa are usually triggers of underlying consequences, hatred, that we tend to sort out our differences during an electoral process and then bury them. Then another 5 years we wake them up because we hate each other. Not because we were taught to hate, but because we haven't interrogated that thing properly. And our leaders are totally disconnected. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think what you're talking about is this really important issue that is lost when we talk about peace as just a political thing, but actually that creating it is in the, as somebody said, intergenerational trauma. And I think it's fantastic that we have now we have so many psychologists involved in this project who have that deep understanding and also understand that psychology tells us that there are routes out of this, but as someone's put in the chat, that there needs to be a lot of support, like public support and public ways of people being able to access that psychosocial support at all levels, as you've done. So that's absolutely fascinating. I'm just going to, Ado, I think you have been very patient and have a question. Invite you
thank
to
you,
share.
thank you. Okay, thank you, Juliana, and the team who are doing the presentation. I'm Ado, and I'm joining you from the northern side of Kenya, near the Dab refugee camp. So,
Hi.
And I was invited to this very powerful session by my teacher. I'm counseling psychology student, and my teacher is Joseph. He's one of my lecturers. So, and it resonates me well because I'm somebody who has been a journalist for 15 years, covering conflict in the southern Somalia and the northern region for the Standard Media Group. And in fact, what has made me to go to study counseling is what I found. Mugo can agree with me that it's not only police, even as journalists who have been covering conflicts, they have never given any, we have never even accepted that we can be traumatized and we need some counseling or social psycho support. So on issue of, and when Neil was speaking about the conflict and its consequences, it also resonates me well because we have a generation of Somali refugees who are staying in northern Kenya in the Dab. Generation and generation. People who came, even they were born in the refugee camp, they're still in a closed area. Their life, they have been very traumatized. I have never seen any organization ever concerned about their psychological, or the PST, the trauma, the experiences. Nobody addressed those issues. All NGOs who come there, they talk about the peace, they talk about education, they talk about other issues, and you find some of them even fighting in those areas with even the host community. They have some problem with them because the Kenyans who live on the other side, the people who have lived in law and order, they understand, but they're Somalis. All of them, we're the same community. And I have seen that effect up to now. Even those who are born in the refugee camp, they are just inheriting, or they are just being, we are just having a generation of people who are just never supported in any way in terms of their psychology and the term of their trauma healing processes. So, and when they're even there, when they talk, you'll see somebody just 8 years old, and he talked the clan politics and the clan conflict in Somalia is as if he wants to do an exam about it, because this is what they are just speaking. So I think it was a good lesson for me. I have really picked a lot of issues, and I think my question is that I will be interested to get this book so that I also read and interrogate, so that I understand more about what and how what was being covered about the Nelly chapter, my teacher chapter, Mugo, and others who have contributed. So I think I'm really learned a lot, and I appreciate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think you've really sort of like helped to sort of expand that sort of the need for awareness, isn't it, about sort of like the great impact of trauma by so many who are close to or experience violence in so many ways. Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? Or would any of our authors like to make any other comments? Okay. I wondered whether, I don't want to put you on the spot, Matilda, but I was just thinking, because your chapter was really trying to think about, well, some of the big challenges and how we might be able to think about or create systems that might I don't know, take some small steps or hopefully transform situations. And I don't know whether any of what we've been talking about sort of like the depth or the breadth or the greater range of sort of like traumas and harm that is committed, if you can see any place for that within some of your proposals and ideas.
Thank you, Julian. Yes, I do see that in my recommendations, because my recommendation was that we take a multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder approach in trying to resolve peace conflict within the African continent. And so psychology weighs in, because then the psychologists are practitioners and they are part of the ecosystem of that comes together to create a peaceful coexistence among the communities within the African continent. So I do see how this ties in, and I also see, because that being a recommendation, it means we need to bring everybody on board, the governments, the international community, of course, because we learn from each other and benefit from each other in terms of creating a peaceful coexistence, not only on the continent, but also globally. So I think that would definitely tie in to what the psychologists are saying, to what the security people are talking about, and to what, of course, the communities are crying for. They are crying for peaceful coexistence. And so it just ties everything together.
Yeah, that's so, thank you very much. That was really really helpful, I think, to everybody, that we're all facing, and the communities we work with are facing a great deal of crisis and harm at the moment. But I think all of your work shows that there are steps forward, and there are ways that people are already, sometimes sort of like when you're talking about the survivors, creating solutions and finding community-based mechanisms to support one another, and that is also something that we should be really pleased about, that your work is highlighting that and making those voices and experiences known, and that is such important work. So thank you all very much for doing that. This has been a great pleasure to host and to work with you on this. This is our global book launch of the book, so it is very, very exciting. And before we leave, it would be great to have a Zoom picture with us all now we've launched the book. But before we do that, I just want to, I'll give Jonathan a chance to talk in a minute. But I know that I really want to sort of like pay tribute to and thank Professor Nagala for his incredible leadership on this project. And I know you are there, Professor. We're not able to hear you, but I know you've been contributing through the chat, and for that we're very grateful. And I think for many of us here, we know Professor Nagala and very much welcome his expertise and guidance. But I think it's important to say for everybody here at this launch that this project would not have happened without his enthusiasm and networking and bringing people together, and also total commitment to how important this is, that this book and that your work is available and enjoyed and influences how we go forward. So Professor Nagala, thank you so much for all of the work you've done and how you've brought all this together. Very much. And I hope I get to see you soon. I'm sure all the others do see you regularly. So thank you very much for that. And Jonathan, you've worked so tirelessly with everybody and really encapsulated a lot of the way forward for this book. I don't know if you want to share any of your thoughts at this point of actually having the book out there in the world.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Rachel. Yeah, this has just been an absolute joy having all the authors here together. I've been interacting with them, over the course of 2 years or so individually, but having us together here as a group and talking to each other about your work is just so special. So thank you all for coming today, and thank you, Professor Rachel, for organizing this, and for Leeds Beckett and Dr. Aiden for your work in bringing this together. We are so grateful to you for that. And just to say also thanks to Professor Ngala, he really is the the connective tissue in all of this. So really grateful to him. I've had many conversations with him about African scholarship. It is something he cares deeply about in his bones. And so I know that this is a big achievement for him in supporting all the authors that are here today, and seeing their work get more publicity, and part of the broader scholarship on peace studies. So I know that that means a lot to him, and so I also feel the same. So thank you all very much. This has just been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and Professor Ngala. And I just wanted to really say a little bit about how the book is important in peace studies. So already my colleagues here at Leeds Beckett are talking about how they're going to use the book within the teaching that we do with our students. And I know that there's other universities who are also interested in this being part of the textbooks and the reference material and the scholarship that we use to teach peace studies. So your work will have great importance for many people. I'm also really thrilled that seeing in the chat today that so many of you are connecting, and I wish I could join you for coffee sometime if I come over to Nairobi. But lovely that you're able to do those very personal connections and continue to support each other. And I for one, I'm sure everybody else will be really thrilled to hear how you take these ideas forward, whether you're able to present and develop them, and also how we share this and grow this. I love the idea that we've connected many peace psychologists together, because I really do think this is such an important part of the work that you're doing, of seeing so much on the ground and in the communities around you that everybody else needs to hear. So if you start your own community of peace psychologists working on this, please tell us, because I think many people will be excited to know. Yeah, so just wanted to say congratulations. Really well done. It's very impressive, and I'm so honoured to be working with you. And yes, I indeed do hope I get to Nairobi soon and can meet up with you. But in the meantime, thank you very much for coming. It's been very special, and I will try and get this video sorted so that you also have it. And maybe before we go, we could do a Zoom picture together. So, but thank you very much, and congratulations to you all. Right, I am going to do. Okay, so anybody who wants to turn their camera on, turn your camera on, and we will do a Zoom picture to do that. There we go. There we go. I've taken picture, literally with my camera. So without further ado, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and have a very much enjoyable rest of your evening today.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.